are here, everybody listening. Welcome to the Raw Onion. This is our fourth installment of our beginning of the year chapter that we have had 4 episodes now throughout January. The theme, as most of you know by now, is realignment over resolutions. And we're really touching on how most of us are coming into the new year feeling like we want to take on a million different things and realizing that it ain't going to work unless we break it down and we look deeper. And that is why we're here to peel back the layers of the raw onion. And I am incredibly excited. Obviously, we have our beautiful Yoshie behind the scenes, as we always do, handling all tech. But we have something even more exciting today. We have, to wrap up our finale of this theme, of this chapter, we have an incredible guest who I am beyond honored to speak with today, Krista Skinner. Now, before I go into what Krista does, who she is working with, all of the beautiful expertise that she's going to show us and talk to us today about, I want to give a little bit of a memo. Everybody, we're going to be talking about forgiveness today as we wrap up this realignment over resolution series. And as we do that, Krista is going to be chatting with us about really deep topics and why, forgiveness is ultimately the cornerstone of, what we talked about earlier this month in identity shifting, but also when relationships do end for any kind of reason. And Krista is no stranger to life's unexpected turns. And she met her ex-husband when they were just 12 years old. They fell in love as teenagers, spent over 3 decades building a life together. But after 22 years of marriage and raising 3 incredible daughters, she found herself facing a reality she never imagined: divorce. And that's one of the topics and the sort of highlighted topic we're going to be talking about today. Divorce and when big relationships need to end. And so before we go into a little bit more about Krista, because I'm so excited and thrilled to have her on, I just also want to make a touch of a memo here that this is not just about people going through or facing or in the thick of divorce or even just coming out of the brutality of divorce. This is also about any kind of relationship ending. And that can mean familial endings. That can mean friendship breakups. Those are very, very painful too, and I'm sure all of us know what that feels like. That can be dealt with in career divorcing, right? So the word divorce is sort of an all-encompassing topic today, and we're going to work with the guise of marriage and how we forgive in terms of those types of relationships. But please make a note that this applies to any and all relationships when these times come, all right? So the process in terms of divorce for Krista left her depleted for years. But through it, she discovered something even more powerful, that there is life after divorce. And this is a big topic today. And it can be even more fulfilling than before. Big things to remember. So, determined to help other women navigate their struggles, Krista became a certified health and life coach through the Health Coach Institute and accredited breakup and divorce coach trained by Sarah Davison, the world's leading divorce coach. Krista is a member of the International Divorce Coach Center of Excellence, the IDCCOE, and is currently completing her master's practitioner certification in domestic violence, as well as her collaborative law training towards IACP certification. So it's a big deal we have her on today, guys. And with deep passion for helping women realign with themselves, Krista's mission is to create a sense of balance and peace before, during, and after divorce as these relationships are ending. So when she's not coaching and working on her professional development, Krista is committed to being an involved and devoted mother. She also enjoys traveling with her partner, spending time with her family, and embracing the beauty of life's next chapter. So welcome, Krista Skinner. Thank you so much for being here today. We are very excited. How are you this morning?
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much for having me today.
Absolutely. And as I said, we're going to dive in deep today, and there's a lot to unpack. And you are the expert in this field in terms of endings and why we need to forgive. And that's sort of what we're going to focus on today. But there's a lot to talk about here in terms of divorce. And we know it's not just marriages. It's when everything ends, when big moments end, when big relationships, when chapters end, there are decisions to be made. And a lot of times before we can even make a decision, there's elements that we have to navigate through. It's almost like walking through molasses or walking through mud, how we get a bit of air and how we start to unpack what we need before we can actually move forward. And, you know, a question that I would love to start with, and this is where we sort of go into, let's jump into somatics. There's a lot to be said about when we're faced with relationships ending and this immediacy of, okay, what now, right? What do we tend to first? And a lot of times I hear people saying many times over, every time I talk to my ex or when things really have blown up, if I have to see them, if I have to deal with anything correspondence-wise with them, I actually have a physical pain that starts to occur in my body. My back hurts, my hips hurt, my brain goes foggy, my chest tightens, I can't get a word in, my throat closes. It's really a somatic experience that so many people have, especially women. I'd love to get your insight on this because it seems like it is a very standard thing that seems to happen to people. What's going on with people's bodies when they're dealt with this intense emotional blow of, all right, we're ending this now?
Well, the negative aspect of the relationship or the trauma that's faced within the relationship, we actually store that within our bodies. And so then what is happening is that if a relationship has involved ongoing stress, betrayal, or feeling emotionally unsafe, the bodies learn to associate that person with threat. And even years later, if you're faced with seeing an ex again or an old friendship or anything like that, the mind might know that you're not okay. And our bodies just don't wait for logic. They react. We'll get a tight throat, the stomach might drop, back pain, sudden wave of anxiety. And often in relationships, there's not a real closure or accountability. The body doesn't really get the message that the danger has passed. So it keeps doing what it learned to do, which is to protect you. And I look at this as not really a weakness. I look at it as intelligence because it means that we have a connection to our body and a connection to what we're feeling. Healing isn't about forcing yourself to be fine and to push through the contact that hurts. It's about helping your body to feel safe again. And in a lot of instances, especially in divorce, it's about establishing firmer boundaries.
Hmm.
It might mean regulating your nervous system before or after you have to have contact, breathing exercises, or making sure that you're taking care of yourself. And it almost always means letting the stress response move through the body instead of stuffing it down. I firmly believe that when we stuff it down, we're creating nervous system deregulation and potentially illness in our bodies. There actually is some statistical evidence out there of increased illnesses in women after relationship breakdown, higher instances of breast cancer and things like that. And I think it's stuffing down those emotions and not getting them out.
Wow.
Over time, the body can learn that this isn't happening anymore, that we're going to be more gentle and graceful with ourselves and letting our body know that we are safe now. And it's not because what we're feeling doesn't matter at all. It's because we matter. And it's important for us to recognize and feel the emotions and deal with the emotions. And typically, if someone, pays a lot of attention to this, they can make these lessen and just overall have a better overall experience with the things that have caused trauma within their body.
Now, this is wild. Well, the exciting part is it is science now, right? This is not theory. This is not theoretical. What you're sharing is proven fact. And one point that you mentioned, it's all incredibly interesting. Now, what you mentioned, getting it out of the body, getting this stress out of the body, and the fact that stuffing it down literally does create illness or can be the precursor to illness. In terms of moving it out, and I'm going to use the words, ending that stress cycle, completing it, rounding it out in any given moment. How would one notice that this is happening? First of all, let's say first, okay, how, if I'm dealing with an ex and I see him, or we need to even text back and forth, and I'm realizing this is not something that's physically good for me. My back is tensing up. Maybe I'm having stomach issues. And one thing that is kind of wild to me, and this is something I forget, even the stomach alone, it is the second brain. And this is something that I think is still new to us to even remember, that the gut alone contains 500 million neurons. So it is the second brain. And so when it's directly connected to the brain in our heads, that is a highway to the vagus nerve. And what that vagus nerve does, exactly what you're describing, is that controls our sympathetic or our parasympathetic. That connection, that highway, is going to tell us, oh, this is going to make me want to puke. This is going to make my hips go out. This is going to tighten my throat. Just because your stomach is now flowing with too much blood, it's away from the digestion, right? That's the nervous system detector mode. Your gut mobility changes. Your inflammation increases. And so this is all happening with what you're describing in real time. So when people are noticing this, how are they going to make that distinction initially? When, this is a warning light, my body's reacting to this external stressor. What does that first step look like for someone? And you had mentioned breathing, or what does this look like? And then how does someone know when it's ending? Beginning and end of this cycle. Can you break that down for us?
Well, the first step is definitely acknowledgement, acknowledging that something is happening to you physiologically when you're being triggered. And so often with clients, we'll sit down and we'll talk about what their triggers are. And they really are different for everybody. One of my clients, she was triggered with just absolute anxiety every time her ex's name came up on her phone, whether through email or through text or anything. And so we actually went in and we changed his name so that we just had to change it to something different to associate, so she didn't see his name anymore. And that, believe it or not, was helpful for her. So it's a matter of us first acknowledging what they are. And typically with clients, we do this through journaling, even if it's just bullet points. Just write down, what are you feeling when this happens? And then they will communicate that with me, acknowledge that within themselves. And then we can move through that. And we try to make a mental association with something different. So a potential song that comes on the radio can trigger somebody into just feeling that their stomach is just turned upside down, or the thought that they may have to go to court or sit in a room with their ex may just completely turn them upside down. I've had clients say that they get nauseous and headache and they can't get out of bed and things like that. So first and foremost, we acknowledge it and then we try to work through it. Often there's things that they can do, from journaling to we do deep breathing exercises, lots of talking, and some of the clients go into things like yoga. Some just have to go and isolate themselves after as well. But in all the instances that I've been aware of, you can really mitigate the triggers and move through it, but you have to feel it first. You really do. And acknowledge it. And that's one of the biggest parts of the whole puzzle to it all and what you're feeling.
Something that I'm hearing you not say, which I think is very important to mention too, is to not avoid it. I mean, basically what you're saying, correct me if I'm misunderstanding, please, but you got to face the beast.
Yes, you do. If you are avoiding it, that is the pushing down. And that is where you allow it to sit with you. And you can't do that. You have to get it out. And for some people, that might be, taking long walks. For some people, that might be a meditation practice. We all have a different coping mechanism and things that work for us. So it's just a matter of finding out what that is. And that is one of the ways that friendships or mentorship or coaching can help, because it helps you break down what actually will work for you and sometimes try different things as well.
Well, you bring up an interesting point too, in terms of friendships, right? And talking about first, understanding what's happening to us physically and mentally, and really doing a self analysis and being able to really care for ourselves in that immediate moment. But also, as we're sort of coming back online after this initial shock, or realizing or coming to this epiphany where, yep, you know what? I realize that this relationship will have to end. And knowing that, okay, well, first things first, my physicality, my well being, but also what am I going to need next? And that often looks like scanning for a support system. And again, we're taking this under the guise of divorce, but endings of any kind of big relationships. Who are people in your direct orbit that you're going to need around you? You need to know, who are you going to go to for what? Because a lot of times, and I've experienced this myself, it's been sometimes more painful than the actual breakup or dissolution of the relationship, is actually not managing my expectations well enough for other people when I'm expecting so-and-so to show up for me and they don't. That's oftentimes harder than the termination of that original relationship. So how do we know who to go to for what when we know, okay, I'm not going to be able to do this alone. I'm going to need help here. And how do we manage expectations of the people around us?
This is such a huge part of the journey and the healing. One of the very first things that we do in my divorce coach training and with every new client is talk about their support system. We actually make a go to list when a person is in crisis because the clarity really does matter. I learned this personally. Early on, I kept going to the same people for everything. I would cry, I would vent, I would try to get advice. And I felt hurt and disappointed. In one instance, I even felt betrayed when a conversation that I had had with someone that I trusted went back to my ex. What I eventually realized is that I was looking for support from people that they weren't equipped to give. And that's where forgiveness comes in here because it's not just forgiveness for what happened in the marriage or in the relationship, it's forgiveness for people's limitations. Some people are great for a laugh, some can hold space for tears, others are really practical, and some, even with good intentions, just can't show up in certain ways. Friends and family are emotionally involved and often unsure what to say, which is why coaching can be so beneficial. And also with certain go-to people, they can get saturated quite quickly. And these are heavy topics and often very negative topics. And so it's hard for other people to sit with that when they have their own stuff going on in their life as well. And that's, a matter of finding balance. One of my clients in the past, she was always getting together with the same group of women that were going through similar stories. And she realized she wasn't moving forward because they were just sitting talking about the grief, the loss, the negativity. And so one of the things that we did in her session was we had her make a list of people that would bring her joy. She actually reconnected with an old friend who she used to be in a hiking group with to get out and do stuff like that because she was sitting in these groups with women that had a purpose for sure, but it was still keeping her stuck. So with coaching, coach isn't in your inner circle. They're trained to support without bias and to help keeping you move forward. When you know who to go to for what, you're protecting your relationships and you free yourself from unnecessary pain during already potentially stressful times. This concept can be adopted for women in midlife going through anything. And my recommendation is just really just know your people and who's appropriate and the right person to go to for what. And often when you really do need someone, you're kind of in pretty negative or a bit of turmoil. So you really want to make sure that you have a definitive list at this time.
You know, this is emotional for me to hear because what I'm hearing too is that these moments in life, right? These big, big moments, such as a divorce or ending any relationship, it's almost like, and again, I'm sort of referencing our past week's conversation topics in terms of identity shifting. This is what I'm hearing you say too. It's really focusing and laser beaming and highlighting directly what you really need. It's actually a beautiful moment in disguise, really taking stock of your life in a very larger bird's eye view, because then you're really having that privilege of perspective to say, all right, one aspect of my life is essentially blowing up. But right now, I'm going to take stock of all of the great things that I do have and all of the wonderful people I do have at my disposal. And I don't mean that in a negative way, of course, but disposal in terms of look at everything else that I've set up for myself. And really, this is a great opportunity to form clarity. And as we know, clarity is a big deal in A, forgiveness, and B, finding your true identity, which is essential in formulation of really that next chapter step. You're building your foundation and you're doing a lot more good than you realize when you're actually taking stock of who your people are and knowing your people, to your point. And, you know, this tells us that endings of relationships are monumental in our journey and our stories in life, because we're also taking back our voices. A lot of times we're taking a look at how we were raised, why we stayed in these relationships, bigger philosophical questions of why did I not leave earlier? Why did I put up with so much? Did I not see the warning signs earlier? And again, we're talking about many relationships, right? There are different versions of this, but anything that doesn't serve you and that ends in a painful way, such as divorce, we're figuring it out. Wait, so, why didn't I leave earlier? Why didn't I know? Why didn't I see? Well, a lot of it, and this is where my interest jumps in because I deal with a lot of epigenetic and lineage-based coaching. How we were raised, what is in our DNA biologically to either stick it out and fight, we don't give up, we don't walk away from commitments that we made. What did my mother teach me? What did my grandmother teach her? All of these things come into play while we're talking about dissolving relationships. How does guilt and shame play into this feeling? Let's say I don't want to disappoint my family of origin, or if divorce was a no-no in my culture, how do I face this new reality on my own that, hey, I'm making my own choices and I'm breaking the mold in a million different ways and I'm going to be just fine doing it? How does somebody process this larger bird's eye view of things?
This is such a fascinating topic. For so many of us, especially in midlife, the decision to stay or leave isn't about the relationship. It's about how we were raised. We come from generations where women stayed, they suffered quietly, they didn't have the options that we do now. So when we even think about leaving, the guilt and the shame can show up pretty quickly, not because we're doing something wrong, but because we're stepping outside of the rules that we inherited that were already made for us. Rules about loyalty, endurance, not disappointing our family of origin. I'm a firm believer that we are rooted and centered in our family of origin. And I know this personally. When I faced my own decision, I wasn't just afraid of ending my marriage, but I was afraid of letting my family, my immediate and extended family down. Midlife has this way of forcing us to choose between the life we were taught to live and the life that we can no longer ignore. Becoming brave doesn't mean that guilt disappears. It means that you're deciding that your well being matters more than maintaining an identity that no longer fits you. Sometimes the most courageous thing that we can do is become the one who breaks that cycle, not in anger, but potentially in living our truth. We become brave when we choose ourselves, which at times can be a really hard concept for women. I often remind myself that I'm not just making choices for me, I'm modeling for my daughters. I was really lucky in my life to have a mother and a mother in law who demonstrated strength and resilience. And it really did shape me more than any advice ever could. I know my choices are teaching, and I point that out to clients too. Sometimes being brave and the courage to change really isn't just for us, it's for those that are watching. And breaking those patterns isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is definitely hard for us to wrap our brains around doing so.
Well, I mean, wrapping our brains around it too, it's almost as if we're required to take a moment and realize that, like an analogy of, all right, and we know this now mentally and neurologically, all of what we do is to survive, is to stay safe. And that's how we're set up as an incredible autonomous system as a human being. And what we do to survive and stay safe, a lot of the times is not logical. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. And when we're operating on old platforms, let's say, and old operating systems, so to speak, we have to then take a moment and honor the fact that, let's say, our grandparents engaged in that behavior because for them, it entrusted them to survive. It gave them that option to stay safe. And 50, 60, 80, 100 years later now, it's okay to say, wait a minute, let me reevaluate what this autopilot behavior is, right? Because maybe it's just not needed anymore. I'm not disrespecting my elders or my ancestry. I'm actually doing the opposite. That's a perspective shift. I'm carrying it on by shifting gears because that is what mental flexibility is, right? And we need to have mental flexibility if we're going to tackle these moments in life. And this leads me to wanting to ask you, and I really, really am so curious, why the heck are women so hard on themselves? And I'm raising my hand here as a woman myself, and why the heck are we so hard on ourselves? It's a challenge and a question that I'm sure we can talk all year about, but please enlighten us.
Well, absolutely. Women are hard on themselves often. I think that there's a couple reasons why this happens. One is when a relationship changes, many of us turn inward and we assume that we've done something wrong because we're taught it's our responsibility to hold things together. We're always supposed to be the glue to the family, the glue to the relationship. We're supposed to always know what we're doing. And so when we feel like we're failing, then absolutely we're going to internalize that and be hard on ourselves. And then the next one would definitely, in my opinion, be that society often frames endings as a personal failure, which makes us blame ourselves instead of seeing that relationships change for many reasons. We can hold a lot of guilt for relationships ending, and that in turn makes us be incredibly hard on ourselves. And at these times, we need to learn that we have to show ourselves some grace instead of doing more of the beating up on ourselves and really try to work through this.
Well, it's a process. That is why we went into coaching and trying to be of service in this manner, right? Because these are things too that, yes, we can do them alone, but this is why we're talking so openly about it now. It often, more so than not, requires an external observer. And that is to bear witness to and encourage the fact that you are transitioning into a whole other version of yourself. And a lot of the times, yes, we will have a support system that can hold us through that. But oftentimes you need somebody who is neutral in that because you're dealing with a lot of mind games that you're playing on yourself, that you have to repattern and reorganize what is automatic to you. And that oftentimes I think is really hard for men, for women, for anybody. But the wild part about how women's brains are shaped, I think, is that the female nervous system is historically shaped to ensure survival through relationship preservation, which is crazy to me to even think. We look men oftentimes as the warriors, right? The hunter-gatherers. They will keep us alive by finding what we're going to eat. Women, on the other hand, from day one of our evolution, we're built to preserve the familial relationship because it's that tribal instinct. We are wired for relational preservation. So, what we're doing is not about being too hard on ourselves almost to the point of a personality flaw. It's the fact that we were adapted to be this way. And we even garner in greater activation of social pain circuits when bonds are threatened. We go back to the physicality of pain because it's not a natural thing to walk away from something. We're not built that way. So we almost have to look back and say, wait a minute, this is going to be happening no matter what. How do I set myself up to build again? So you're adding your capacity to what is already built in naturally. And that again is a beautiful mindset shift to say all of the things, all of these beautiful tips that you're giving people, Krista, it's so much deeper and so much more profound than what I think we even realize. And there's a lot to it. And so when we talk about these shifts and these small tweaks in behavior or in our daily routine or who we look for to support us, these are not small deals, guys. This is big stuff wrapped in small doable packages. And that's what really the raw onion is all about, trying to make it tangible, trying to make it doable. And that's why it's so incredible what you're talking about here. And we're talking about why we're so hard on ourselves. We know now there are stages of grief. This is, we go through these stages, right? Why are we hard on ourselves during the stage of rage? Why are we going to be hard on ourselves during the grief stage where we fall apart? Or there's stages where we'll do anything to get ourselves back together in the relationship. We're desperate to go back. Hey, I'm sorry, please, can we make this work? This anxiety of, no, I don't want to lose it all. How do we stop ourselves and reel it in again? What are some go-tos that we can anchor ourselves with during these stages of grief that we know will happen?
Well, when a marriage or a relationship ends, people often move through different emotional phases, and it's different for everyone. There's really no order to it or no timeline. You can feel okay one day or completely undone the next, or feel several things at one time. At first, there's often shock for people. Things can feel unreal or numb, or you're just trying to get through the day. That's not the time to have everything figured out. It's time to slow down and just take care of the general basics. Then there can be a lot of panic or desperation. Fear can show up along with shame, the feelings of how did I get here or did I fail? Those thoughts can feel very loud, but they really don't tell the whole story. The sadness and grief, it tends to come in waves. That's when the loss really lands and it can feel heavy. Nothing is wrong with you here. This is what grieving something that mattered actually can feel like. Anger can show up too, even when people feel uncomfortable admitting that. Anger often points to hurt or crossed boundaries. When it's allowed safely, it can actually be protective. What I always want people to know is this: none of the feelings mean that you're doing it wrong. They're part of being human in the middle of huge life changes. Healing isn't about pushing those feelings away, it's about meeting yourself with kindness as you move through them. In coaching, we always say that we meet our clients where they are at in each phase of grief. We address what they're feeling that day, and together we try to process it and move through it. That doesn't mean that they're through it either. We could address an anger issue and then there can be a trigger, and a month later, we're back to addressing that issue again. Healing is not linear, it can change every single day. And it's just a matter of showing grace and knowing that we're able to, with the right tools in place, process it and move forward through every emotion that we're feeling.
Well, and what you say, it comes and goes when you say that, and it hits in waves. That is something that I've heard many times with clients and friends, and I've experienced it myself too. It's a tough reality to grasp because there's no knowing. And I know as humans, right, we love to predict. We don't like surprises. We are predictability machines. And so we want to know, we want the end date. We want to look on the calendar and say, hey, it looks like on March 3rd, that's when my grief cycle will end. And then I can put that behind me. And that's not how it works. So in terms of being able to sit with these feelings, that seems to be, again, looking what you'd mentioned beautifully earlier, allowing these cycles to complete. And it almost wants me to use the word patience when we look at the bigger picture, and maybe the most important aspect of all of this is forgiving ourselves and looking at the fact that it doesn't happen overnight, and the fact that we can respect that because our behavior and our nuanced relationship to the past and the present is a lot more complicated than just saying, okay, well, let's just get over it. This is a full body experience, and we need to honor that. And I think self-forgiveness is, well, I don't know. You jump in and please take the wheel, Krista, because self-forgiveness to me, and as I can speak for myself, as relationships had ended and it was painful, the final step through all of these ebbs and flows of healing, I had to look at myself and take stock in the role I played in the dissolution of these relationships, but also be able to say, wow, okay, no matter what, here we go with self-forgiveness. And that, for me at least, was the hardest part of healing. And again, I will preface this to say, with respect, I have not experienced divorce, but I've experienced a lot of other dissolutions of relationships. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this idea of self-forgiveness, because through it all, is this the cornerstone? Is this our anchor, or is it not?
It's very heavy. Self forgiveness begins when we stop judging our past choices through the lens of who we are today.
Oh, wait, say that again, Krista. What is that? Say that again. That's a big one. That's a big one.
Self forgiveness begins when we stop judging our past choices through the lens of who we are today.
Wow.
Most people did the best they could with the information, the resources, and the emotional capacity that they had at the time. We stayed because we hoped, we ignored things because we were trying to survive. And that's not just for divorce, that's in any aspect. Forgiving yourself doesn't mean that you're denying mistakes. It means understanding the context in which those choices were made and offering yourself compassion instead of living in shame. Self forgiveness also involves grief, grieving the time, the version of yourself, or the life that you thought you were building. That grief has to be held and it deserves the space to be held. Over time, forgiveness grows when you choose to live more honestly and aligned with who you are now, not as a punishment for the past, but as you do care for yourself. Self forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's just understanding and allowing that understanding to be enough. And those are important things that we have to learn on this journey. It's super important.
Well, it's almost as if when we don't forgive ourselves, I mean, I'm just trying to sort of process what you're saying. It almost seems like when we don't forgive ourselves, we remain in this unsafe state, so to speak, that it's almost as if we're living in a constant state of unfinished threats. Does that align with what you're explaining?
Yeah. If you're not willing to look inward and forgive yourself and to accept yourself and accept the past or mistakes that were made, I don't believe that you can move forward. It just keeps you stuck in that space. And it's kind of the cornerstone is that self forgiveness. And then it allows you to live more peacefully and move in the direction that we all want to move.
You know, a few episodes ago, we were talking really in depth about the prefrontal cortex of the brain and where the rumination lives in terms of how humans are set up, how women, how men, we're all set up this way. And listeners, we can all relate to this. When we sit and when we're ruminating, right, we tend to spiral mentally. And this is kind of what I'm feeling with what you're saying is when we're starting to spiral and when we're continuing this almost this threat loop of I should have, why didn't I? How did I miss that? What did I do wrong? Why? That is rumination. And where does that live? In the default mode network in our brain. And what does that tell us? That tells us that our thinking and decision making is offline. We're not thinking with awareness, we're thinking with autopilot behavior. That means we're not online. And so when we aren't online, we're not able to forgive because we're constantly ruminating about the past. And, one tactic that I've learned that I think, and this is what we're trying to figure out, ease. How do you, in this situation, when we're not really mentally, we're shocked. Maybe we're still in the shock phase of what's going on. Something that tells the brain the danger is over. I'm no longer under internal attack here. And this is something I do for myself. Maybe you'd like to, I'm sure you have many more than I do, Krista, but one thing that really works, and this is, when we're totally offline, freezing an orange. Literally putting an orange in the freezer or a full water bottle in the freezer. When we're stuck in this and we're not able to think clearly and we need to sort of snap ourselves out of this spiral, I go grab that orange or that frozen water bottle from the freezer and just put it right behind my neck, in the crook of my neck. And all that cold almost shocks my vagus nerve back into, wake up, you're ruminating, this isn't based in fact. The fact is, I have a support system. The fact is, I know that I'm going to be okay. The fact is, I have my self-monitoring tactics that can get me through this. I know what to do when my gut is acting up. I have my roster of things I can do, people I can go to. And that small micro movement of putting a frozen orange behind my neck snaps me back to this awake state. Wait a minute, I've got this. And so I would love to hear from you, these short and easy hacks that when people are stuck in the mire, stuck in the mud, what are things that you tell your clients to kind of come back online, so to speak? Because we know that this is really tactics that help us get to that place of forgiveness. What do you tell your clients when these things are happening?
Well, typically it comes after getting to know them a little bit and knowing where their kind of passion and those sort of things come from. One of the things that I was taught early on and I do with my clients is we come up with something like their ideal day. And this is where they formulate if they could have anything that they wanted in their day, what it would look like. And so then when they're having a bad day or a bad moment or they're in a bad reaction, we try to go back and pick out at least one thing from that day that they can bring in to help calm their nervous system or to help them make them feel like, it's not over. We've got this. We're moving forward. Those types of things. I'm a firm believer in journaling. That's always my go-to. I don't care if it's doodling. I don't care if it's just writing something down. I've told people, you can write it down, you can rip it up, you can burn it. It's a negative thought. If you just want to tell your ex off that day, you can write it all down. Don't write it in an email and send it. I've done do it. Write it down, get rid of it, and get it out. That's kind of the goal all the time, is get it out of your body and regulate yourself. Because when you're in the thick of those emotions, finding that regulation, it's really hard. I've had a client that was really good with her yoga and her breath work and just calming her down. And she would do like 4 breaths in, hold for 4, 4 breaths out. Little things like that can really help somebody. I've never heard the orange one before. I do like that one. I might try that.
I prefer orange. And again, I do this myself. I prefer orange over water bottle because you get the aroma as well. So, you have that sort of beautiful orange oil aroma, and that's just something that works for me, right? I'm a tactile person that I like the scent and touch and all the senses activated. And journaling too. I think that is essential. I bet some of your clients too, I'm sure many people, even if it's not a paragraph of logical writing, it's just free flow, right? Get it? It's almost like you're a proverbial dump truck that you're going to collect the trash and then spit it right out and put it somewhere else that's not physically attached to you. You're literally taking it out of your orbit and putting it somewhere else.
Yeah. And the bottom line is it really does come down to processing everything that you're feeling.
I mean, processing is another topic. Really, we could go into a million versions of what processing means. But under the lens of forgiveness, the way I take processing is it's self-love. And what does self-love mean? It's self-trust. And why forgiveness is so critical after a toxic or hard relationship that involve maybe gaslighting, power imbalance, emotional unpredictability. That disrupts the brain's trust circuitry. It makes you armor up for the unknown. That causes that anxiety. And so your nervous system stays hypervigilant. You don't want that. And so all of these incredible things that you're mentioning, Krista, that, instead of blocking intimacy and ease with yourself, these are tactics that allow you to open up again so you can see clearly again, so your brain feels safe again. And that body level consequence of not forgiving, we'll go back and sort of make a beautiful circle here in terms of being honored by your body. It all kind of culminates together, doesn't it, Krista? And what you're mentioning, it's not living in an autonomous place. These are all very rooted and linked together with nervous system ease and with formulating a new identity for yourself. And
I love that reference and reminder to self-love.
As we wrap up, please talk to us about self-love, because that is something I think most people really, really forget in this process. Self-forgiveness and self-love.
Well, forgiveness is the most important step of healing, not because it's excused what's happened or lets anyone off the hook, but because essentially it frees you. And part of forgiveness, as we talked about, is forgiving ourselves. And then part of it is forgiving others, whether, sometimes along the journey, you get a family or a friend that has hurt you. And the way to ground through that is with that self-love and showing yourself grace. And we go back to how we're modeling for other people. And so when you have established ways that you're showing and you're truly living a little bit more authenticity, you're showing self-love to others and what that means and what that matters. And from a perspective of motherhood, self-love has been something that's been very hard for me because the love is always going outward. And my whole life, it went outward. It went out to my husband. It went out to my children. And I forgot, what it truly was to love myself and to take care of myself. And I think a lot of my clients that I've had in motherhood, they're just struggling to love themselves because we're taught about the failures around us. We see it online all the time now, the people that seem to have it all put together and they can do more in a day than what we can do. And some days we just feel like we can barely get out of bed. So it really does come down to self-love and teaching yourself it's okay to prioritize yourself. It's okay to forgive yourself. It's important to forgive others. And taking care of ourselves is a cornerstone for sure. It's very, very important.
Well, what you're saying reminds me of what they tell us on airplanes. That first note when you sit down and before you take off, if the masks come down, you put yours on first before you help your neighbor. And it's almost when you show your kids that kind of self-love to say, hey, I've got to be strong so I can show you pure and unconditional love. And then they will be able to see that too, that, hey, wait a minute, I matter. I matter. And so what your actions are doing, you're paying it forward to your lineage. And so what you're honoring from your past, you're alchemizing and bringing it forward for the next generation, which I think there is no greater love that you can show, to love yourself so that your children, your babies can see, wait a minute, that's the most important thing. No matter what happens in life, I love myself. And that's a big deal.
Very big deal. Yeah, that was nicely put.
Well, this is all coming from you, Krista. You've been beyond informative, and the heart that you give and it's the love that you give is what's needed in the world right now, especially as things are tricky in life. Dissolving relationships is even trickier, and the compassion that you bring, it's what the world needs right now. So it's an absolute honor. And in closing, guys, self-forgiveness and forgiveness in general, it is a deep and huge topic. I hope we can revisit this later because we're far from done, but this is laying a beautiful foundation for everyone. And self-forgiveness tells the nervous system that the danger is over. That's the important part. Rumination subsides, executive networks re-engage, and a woman's voice returns, not as a reaction, but as authorship. This is your time now. So when the brain no longer rehearses the past, it finally has the bandwidth to choose the future. Krista Skinner, ladies and gentlemen, you can find more about Krista on KristaSkinnerCoaching.com. I encourage you to check her out. What she does is incredibly vital for everybody, and it's been an absolute honor to have you, and thank you so much for indulging us and introducing us to these incredible life pivots and the importance of really what forgiveness is all about. Thank you, Krista Skinner. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's been just the raw onion coming into my life was just such a unique, organic experience for me. And it's been wonderful. Yeah, it's getting to know you guys. It's been great. Thank you.
Well, the feeling is mutual, and this is what happens when alchemy occurs, when like minds come together and trying to give people good things to tap into and anchor themselves with and fortify themselves in this crazy journey we call life. So thank you, Krista, and we hope to have you again. Ladies and gentlemen, this is The Raw Onion. Keep peeling back layer after layer, over and out, inside and out. Stay tuned for next week, and we'll catch up later. Thank you, everybody. Raw Onion. Take care.